Hi, so today I'll be talking about some study tips related to Step 2 CK. This is all that I learned after several months of anxiety and figuring out what works, what didn't work, and hope this helps you get through CK because it was very stressful for me, and I just hope to save you some time by talking about some key resources. So I've been getting some questions about how long to study, and I think based on my experience, ideally a month of studying. I think you want to have a minimum of 2 weeks of intensive studying, and what I mean by that is like 10 to 12 hours a day of intensive studying, like pure like UWorld and taking notes and doing whatever it is you need to do to study. And if you did no studying since STEP or have done not much studying during your research year, I would give yourself a little bit longer time to start studying, so maybe like 2 months. Not hardcore studying, not nearly at this level of intensive studying that I described, but more like familiarizing yourself with UWorld, getting used to that format, finding your right study strategy, finding out how you best take notes, how you best study. All that you want to figure out before this period of time you have to study. Ideally a month, but it could be less than that. I did only 3 weeks of dedicated study time. Prior to that, I was more casually studying, but I think looking back on it, I think I should have probably, I wish I had 1 more week. But regardless of that, still did okay. Still did fine. Still did better than I expected. But I think minimum, looking back, you want 2 weeks of that study time. Now, this is all assuming you were doing your studying during third year or, casually studying and reviewing some topics during research year. Like I said, you want to give yourself a little more time before this study period to figure things out, to familiarize yourself again with these topics if you haven't really done much since your step 1. Okay, test resources. I divided it a little bit based on how much time you have. So if you had more than one, or planning to have more than 1 month of dedicated study time, here are some things that I find kind of helpful for you if you have a little bit more time. So Cram Fighter, this is like scheduling resources that helps you, like if you know what resources you're using, it'll help put like tasks for the day, and it allows you to check those off once you complete them. It's to help you know how many questions you want to do for UWorld to reach a certain amount. So you can set that to whatever it is that your goal is of how many questions you want to do. And I find actually this could be, I didn't do this, but maybe I should have, start using this during third year to kind of help me be more consistent with doing UWorld. I was very inconsistent. I wish I had done more UWorld in third year. But it's also helpful during the beginning of your research year to have a checklist of how many questions you want to get through during the weekdays. I started off, I want to say in October, but very casually, not really hardcore, and I think I started off with 12 questions during the weekday, and then it kind of ramped up to a full block, like I want to say by the end of January, because I kept, with all the holidays, I kept like not doing them and feeling like I had tons of time, and so I ended up not doing as much that I had set out to do, which is fine, but just be generous when creating your schedule and noting holidays, and if you don't want to work on weekends, which I set it to. But what's nice about this resource is that it can reorganize everything if you miss days. Like I've definitely missed several days, and it'll reorganize and tell you how many questions you would need to do having missed those days. So that's what's great about that resource. And then I really actually towards the end didn't really use Crime Fighter towards the end because I was more focused on the things that I needed to, my weaknesses and things I needed to fix. So this becomes less important as you get into your intensive study period. So definitely you don't really need to use this if you don't got a lot of time. Number 2 resource is Anki. So I was using the Premade deck, Anki step 2, but there's tons out there. Just pick one and just go with it. Find one that you like. I liked the simplicity of Anki, so I went with that. The other thing you should be doing is creating your own deck and making your own cards of your incorrects from UWorld. I'll explain a little bit more examples of how I did how I set up my Anki cards in case you want to do something similar. But towards the end, I would, especially when you're in crunch time, I would move to prioritizing studying your deck and not really studying so much from your these pre-made decks, because these are more personalized for you, like stuff that you got wrong. So I would move towards your own deck. And then another resource that I found could be helpful for some people is this podcast by Divine Intervention. You can just search his name. I think he's on iTunes, and there's also a website that you can go to. His content is really helpful when you have extra time, downtime, and you want to be super efficient. So you can listen to it while you're on the car ride to work, to school. If you're walking your dog, that's when I listen to it on my car rides to the dog park. Again, some people they're not audio learners. So I know I'm not a big, strong audio learner, and this was less helpful than it could have been, but it could be helpful for other people who kind of like this format. I know Divine Intervention has four video format study reviews that I kind of liked a little bit more, just because I'm more of a visual learner. I would recommend checking out those if you're more of a visual learner. On his website, he does have a spreadsheet about the list of topics that he has, and it's divided by step 1 topic, step 2 CK project topics, and within that, he'll identify this for internal medicine, this is heme topics, this is OBGYN. So if you, I found it most helpful if I was struggling with a topic, example, cancers, hematology topics. I would go and re-listen to some of those topics a couple times, and especially if I had recently was studying that topic in UWorld, it would kind of refocus me on that topic and help reinforce some of the stuff that I was learning in UWorld. So that's where I found it most helpful. I wouldn't say it's the most high yield resource, but it could be if you just have a little bit extra time, you're going to have a 30 to an hour commute and you just have that time. Each episode I think is about 30 minutes for reference, so they're not that long. Okay, lastly, practice test. I would do all the UWorld assessments that they have. They have two available. I would do all of them. So there's also out there NBMEs. I think I took 2 of them, 7 and 8. After taking them, they didn't really strike me as being very similar to UWorld or even the real test for me. I did 7 and 8, which were the most recent ones that they released. And those I did kind of back to back to simulate the test day of 8 hours. So I think that was helpful. So I think NBMEs are only useful for that purpose, and their score was not really that predictive from what I saw. And then from hearing, both browsing Reddit and also listening to other students, I also found that they thought the same. So I wouldn't stress too much if you feel like your practice tests on your NBMEs were below your UWorld scores or anything like that. And if you're tight on money, then I would recommend doing your UWorld, your UWorld Q Bank, and doing about anywhere between 4 to 8 blocks depending on how long you how many blocks you want to do. If you want to simulate, then I would do like 8 blocks or something. And I recommend selecting all and doing it timed. So, I mean, that's key for UWorld too. I think I might go a little bit more into that later, but making sure to do it all and timed is key. Okay, now if you have less than a month, besides UWorld is key, but the things that I think are the most high yield that I found was you're doing your own Anki cards, focusing on only your cards, because you made them, you put the notes in there. They're all on your incorrects. I found that the most helpful to do. So I'll show an example of what I included in my Anki cards. And then the other essential resource is going to be the practice test. So again, do all the UWorld assessments. I recommend doing one at the very beginning of your intensive study time. Or no, if you have 3 weeks or a month, do it at the very beginning of when you're going to dedicate it. And early as possible. I made the mistake of doing it like I think 2 weeks before the exam and being super crushed with how low my scores ended up being on the practice test, and was really stressed out about it, not sure if I was going to change my test date, and was freaking out. And then it took a while for me to like refocus and get back into the group. What I ended up doing after that was practicing the timing. I realized the timing is what could get you. So I recommend also simulating at least one test day, maybe a week before your test date, like the full 8 hours is how it's going to be, to really give you a sense of your stamina and how you're doing. That I think is also key to just help you get in that mode and get you ready for taking such a long and arduous test. Just a little bit about UWorld. You'll find that there's a lot of questions, and I think they still keep adding more and more questions. So I think it's like 2,000 plus questions. I think it was 2,200 at the time that I took it. But you might not get through everything, and that's okay. I know people got a whole range of what they were able to get through, depending on how much time you devoted to it. I think I ended up completing, I want to say 75% of it. So I didn't finish everything, but that was perfectly fine. And then from personal experience, the UWorld Q Bank is probably the most accurate predictor of how you will do on the test. So it gives you an average based on how you're doing in the test. You can compare your trends, like if you're increasing in percentage of how many you're getting correct. That will give you a sense of how you will do on the test. So if you're like straight in the middle, like meeting whatever the average is, you're probably going to get around that percentile score on your test. This is what I found. Also through browsing through Reddit, because I was pretty stressed out about everything. So I did the mistake of looking through Reddit and going to the dark hole of Reddit and being stressed out by all these people with 270 plus CK scores. There are lots of Excel spreadsheet predictors out there, and they update they put out a new one every year based on people who've submitted their scores and results they got for a bunch of different resources they used. So I recall when I looked at their data, they were talking about how the UWorld practice tests, and it always changes every year, so it's not always the same, or the UWorld practice tests were the most predictive, I think last year, as of 2019. I did not find that to be the case at all. Like I input all my data in here. What was actually the most predictive for me, again, was the UWorld Q Bank percentage that I was getting towards the end before I was taking the test. And I ended up scoring above whatever they predicted for me to get. So it's hard to gauge, but the UWorld Q Bank, I think, was the most predictive of that. So just to let you know, not be super stressed as I was about your scores being lower than you thought, lower than your UWorld Q Bank scores. They're not always super predictive. Okay, so now how to use your UWorld Q Bank. You should do it only timed. Don't do it like tutor mode, like I was doing in the beginning. It's not helpful. You're going to be under a tight time pressure on this test. You're not going to have enough time on the real thing. And then I think I mentioned this again earlier, but during that your month of intensive studying, specifically those last 2 weeks, you want to select all subjects / systems and have it be randomly selected. That includes some questions that you've already done, some new questions if you have some left over in your Q Bank. You should be doing this all random to kind of simulate the real test. Again, as I mentioned, at a minimum, you should be doing these all random at the last 2 weeks. So this is a mistake that I made towards the end, and I realized was a mistake, was I was kind of on the close end to completing my Q Bank, in that like I think I didn't have any more medicine questions that I didn't do. So I started doing just the incorrects, and I think I was getting weirdly too high of a score. I was recognizing the questions more easily. So what helped me was, again, doing that all, selecting all, including all the questions I've already done, because they're intermixed. They'll intermix it and they'll be random. The results I got from that made more sense to me than when I was just doing all the incorrects. So I think that was a mistake. For the Q Banks, when you're doing the practice test, it will feel like you're spending a lot of time for little questions, for just a few questions. But I think that's relatively normal from all the people that I've talked to about this, because I thought it was just me, that I felt like I was spending too much time, but it's worth it. It's worth it to spend time carefully going through the Q Bank explanations, the pictures and the graphs, the tables, and making sure you understand the answer, but also why you got the answer wrong. Spend as much time as you need to understand the topics, because if you just brief over it, it's gonna be harder for you to understand conceptually what was this question about and what did you need to know about it. So for your intensive studying time, I would aim for 2 to 3 blocks. It was really hard for me to get up to 3 because I wanted to review all the topics and go through it carefully, and I found it was like taking like a really long time, like the whole day into the night. So I ramped up from just doing 1 block to 2 blocks, and then occasionally 3 blocks, but that was already a lot. Like I had no life. I think it's normal to just be at 1 or 2 blocks and spending a lot of time studying it. If you can get up to 3 blocks, I think that's probably the most efficient. But again, spend the time you need to make sure you understand the topic. And then the charts and tables, images, everything from the UWorld explanations is like the best information you could get for the test. I had mentioned earlier about the PDF of all the UWorld notes. This is probably the best resource you can get, mainly because you can search topics. So one thing I found with the Q Banks is that they'll explain really well the correct answer, but if you selected the wrong answer, it's not the main topic of focus. They might not go in depth in it as well, but I wanted to understand why I got it wrong, why it was different from the correct answer. In that case, that's when you can pull out this all UWorld notes and search the PDF for that topic, and then you can read up about that specific topic that might not be explained as well in that UWorld explanation because they were focusing on some other topic. And I also went to FedEx and printed this out into books and kind of use it as a textbook to look at the pictures and refer to them. But honestly, I think just having the PDF and having it be searchable is awesome. So I recommend that PDF, finding it, and using that to help you when you're going through UWorld. So how to study from UWorld? These are some of the things that I did. I kind of trialed this. I tried very different formats. You can actually see from one of the videos on my channel where it's just like basically Word and my notes. I tried that format and it didn't really work for me. So I moved to PowerPoint. And I'll show you another evolution of that next. But I found that for some reason, creating notes in PowerPoint was easy for me to create like subheadings and then notes in there. And then there's also a separate notes section for miscellaneous notes. So again, studying from UWorld is a very individual experience. So what works for me might not work for you. Spending some time figuring out what actually works for you before you get into that study mode period is key for helping you figure out what works. Just a little context about me so that you can compare and see if my experience is similar to yours and if this could help. I'm mainly a visual learner. I'm not the best test taker. I struggle a lot with timing. I had a below average step, so I really had to prove myself on this step 2 CK. So that's where I was at, and these are some of the things that worked for me. So again, the PowerPoint. So this is an example of one of the PowerPoint slides that I did. This was on the hyperosmotic hyperglycemic state. And I started having some topics. I fleshed this out a little bit more, but like clinical characteristics, epidemiology, labs management. I had kind of sections and subnotes for that. Sometimes I bolded stuff that was really important to note. And then in the notes section I sometimes wrote about like key notes. So I would put some miscellaneous notes in here that might not easily fit in here. So you can see just an example of some of that content. Okay. So why the PowerPoints were super helpful in doing that is that I encountered a bunch of topics multiple times. And then you're kind of able to build on the notes that you already have, or just kind of like figure out like where these things connect, because sometimes it's not like a direct relationship, or it's like tangential to what the question was. But here's an example of one that I counted a lot of times. CMV came up quite a lot, and I kept getting this question wrong, so you can see that why I have like more notes than some of the other ones, but it kept coming up and I kept getting it wrong. But it was really important to see like why I kept getting it wrong. Like let's see, here it was talking about hearing loss, and I picked the wrong answer, and then I kind of explained why it was the wrong answer. Looks like I got a question wrong about microcephaly, and then also explain why. So you want to come back and build upon your PowerPoint, your general notes about the disease, and then also like kind of helpful like lessons learned. That's what I call them, lessons learned about why you got this wrong and what the correct way to think about it is. Okay, so I eventually streamlined this for me, and mainly because I didn't really like how the other PowerPoint looked. So I eventually made a template where I had these sections all in them, and then I covered up the ones that I didn't have notes for. Like this one, I didn't really have notes on diagnosis here, so I just covered this up with a generic block. What I liked about this is that I still had a section for extra notes and other stuff and my lessons learned. It was more, it looked more streamlined and in more of a note format, like a traditional note format, but with the ability to still search. So I found this the best format for me to use, and this is you can actually see some of my example presentations on the channel, which I recorded. But the key things I liked in here were the extra notes and my words of caution, which is basically the lessons learned. So to warn me about this section was to warn me about reasons why I got this topic wrong. So I always had tried to put something in there for that on why I'm writing about this topic. And this is a little thing that I did for myself only because I had a little time and I was still trying to figure out how to best learn. But I recorded myself pretending like I was teaching to someone with my PowerPoint notes Or even while I was reading some of the text resources I was using, I was pretending like I was teaching someone who was there. And it really helped me like hear myself, hear how I was thinking early on. But I wouldn't recommend doing this if you don't have enough time. Just focus on what's on the key resources. But I have some examples of that, the better ones, up there on my channel, just so you can see what that was like for me. But I definitely had recordings that were terrible, but they were helpful for me in hearing myself think through some of the topics that I wasn't sure about. So if you find that helpful, then you can do that just for yourself. Okay, the other thing is the Anki cards and making your own Anki cards from your incorrects on UWorld. So again, very individual approach here on how you write your Anki cards. It all will depend on how you're best understanding the question. In general, I try to pull out the info that will help me get to the right answer from the text that's there. So in this case, like oftentimes it's like demographics of the patient, any abnormal vitals, or vitals that I think might be important, or maybe even the setting, like where is this taking place. So this I found easiest to do for me because I was doing that kind of note-taking method I described in How to Approach CK. And I was doing that just to help me understand like how I'm thinking about the questions and what I'm missing. So I was doing that note-taking method. So that was easy for me to like pull out and be like, okay, I should note that this is happening in wintertime, there was seizures, was unconscious. So I was able to pull that out because I already had it in UWorld. And then the other thing I did here was to pull out some key info about the question that wasn't really the answer to the main topic here, like kind of miscellaneous stuff here. Like I think I wrote here, you don't need an EEG for this. I think I selected EEG for this. This was like a really easy question, but for some reason I was tripped up on it. But I'd kind of described like kind of reasons why. I think I overlooked that it was winter time and just like reminders that I got to make sure to note the setting for myself. So just like miscellaneous notes that don't really fit in the description of the main topic, but are kind of related to it. So that's kind of the stuff that I would add there. So again, sometimes the wrong answer is as important as the right answer. So I used this section a lot, this extra section right here, to kind of explain why I got the wrong answer. And sometimes I add a little more detail about the right answer. And sometimes, occasionally, images are helpful. I have done that, but it's kind of hard to do. If you have UWorld open, you can't really copy and put images, and it's kind of annoying to go back to do them. So I didn't do it very often, but if it was really important to understanding the question, then I would. But like his example here, like it looks like I had answered biliary enteric fistulas here, which was the wrong answer, and then I explained like, well, because you wouldn't have air here if that were the case. So just explaining why you got that wrong is helpful for understanding the whole question. Like I probably frequently got this question wrong when I was reviewing the Anki, so it was nice to think about why that was the case. Okay, and then also using Premade decks. I used Zonky Step 2 Premade deck. Really, any of those. I saw a lot of like use this or use that Reddit threads about which Premade deck is the best deck for CK, and I'm pretty sure it changes every year and there's new ones that come out. So just pick the one that you think is best for you, or whatever they're saying is the best one, and then just go with that and just stick with that. I liked this one because it seemed more streamlined than some of the other ones, so I ended up just sticking with that. But like I said, this is helpful because there's a lot of cards. If you have a little more time to study, I found that I learned probably the most efficiently with my own cards, but I did do this and I did find it helpful like in the beginning because I hadn't touched any step one topic. I haven't studied any topics at the beginning of research year, and so this just helped me get back into the groove of things. Okay, if you're really tight on time, I recommend reading Pathoma, the textbook form. It just has some like good step one material, generic. It's a really small book, so you can get through a lot just reading. I highlighted some stuff. I recorded myself talking through some of these stuff that I was confused about. And I found it super helpful because I did get some step one topics on my tests. Not a lot, but I think it just elevated me a couple points that I might not have gotten otherwise. And I did this I think it was a week prior, a little bit less than a week prior. So someone had recommended me doing this. I thought, it wasn't going to be helpful, but after like reading through it, it kind of like reminded me of step one and some of the CK topics. So I do recommend that you kind of look at this towards the end. And then ultimately, like I ended up scoring, I want to say 25 to 30 points higher than any of the practice tests I got. So I feel like this last minute reading of Pathoma and reviewing my Anki cards, they pushed me up a lot higher than what I thought I was going to get. So that's it for that. And I hope this was helpful for you all in kind of seeing how I approach step 2 CK. It's a very stressful test. I want to save you all some time on some of the resources that I think might have been the most helpful. But again, it's all based on how you best learn. Some people don't learn the same way. So just experiment with what's working for you and figure out what isn't. And just a little comparison for step. This is a completely different thing than I did for step 1. Again, because I didn't score like I wanted to on step 1. And I think looking back, the mistake I made was using too many resources. So this is a lot more of a streamlined set of resources than I used for step 1. So I think that helped me just as a reference point if you're in the similar situation. I approached this much differently than I did step 1. And if you're in the same kind of situation, I would also approach it differently so that you can achieve what you want to achieve. All right, that's it for now. Thank you for listening.